Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Architecture of Health. I'm Deb Voisin, and this week I have Anna Gieselman, who is a neuro coach and a mobility specialist. I found her on Instagram. Her account is Beyond Functional, and that's what I saw. She was offering deep solutions to problems that I wanted more of you to learn about. So, welcome to our show, Anna.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here and I appreciate you inviting me.
And the nice thing, guys, is you can go to her Instagram account, beyond_functional, and immediately try things that have can provide an instant measurable change. That's the top level, but there's something much deeper going on with how did she even start thinking this way? How far can things go? And what can we do to avoid, manage our chronic pain and to become the best, most long lasting, durable, resilient people possible. So let's start. Uh, and we won't spend too long on this, but as we were preparing for this call, you were saying why you even got into this realm is you had your own personal struggle. Do you care to say much about that before we dive into the details?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been working in the healing arts since my early 20s and I'm now 40, almost 44. So I was a massage therapist for a decade. I taught yoga for over 10 years. I um, have taught meditation. I have done a lot. And when I was about 36, I got diagnosed and with multiple autoimmune diseases. The biggest one was lupus. And lupus is a real dumpster fire of a autoimmune disease. And I was really sick. I had chronic inflammation throughout my body. Was covered in a rash most days, all around my body, swelling, eyes swelling, tongue swelling, joint swelling. It was pretty miserable for about 5 years. And I first was like, I'm going to do this all natural. I'm going to heal naturally. And that's what I tried to do mostly for that time. And during that time, one of my friends who works in this same industry of applied neurology, she was like, you're you're experiencing chronic pain, you're experiencing chronic inflammation, and both of those are outputs of your nervous system. So you should work with your nervous system. And at the time I felt like, well, I meditate every day, I do yoga, I eat. I was like really healthy eater for most of my life. So I felt like I already am doing those things. And she took me to a weekend clinic with a company. It's a brain-based company called Z Health. Z is in Zeta. Um, and it was just a weekend kind of intensive. And during that time, we were practicing applied neurology drills, and I instantly had relief from some of my pain. Like in the workshop, in the time, it's like, wow, that's wild. I need to know more. So I started studying it, and I really started studying it for my own benefit. I wasn't intending it to go where it went. Um, the only other things that helped me at the time were like painkillers and pharmaceuticals. So to have something as simple as like doing some breathing drills or some eye drills, vision drills, or cranial nerve stimulation, to have that make a dent in my pain levels instantly was pretty cool. So that opened up the doorway, and then I've continued to study since then. So, and then eventually it just seeped into my practice of teaching. I also, at the same time, started studying functional range conditioning, which is like a joint specific training, basically to make sure your joints function like joints, and what to do when they are not. So that's more of like a straight up biomechanical modality. And then I now mix the two together because the brain is the governing system, or the nervous system is the governing system, but it cannot be separated from the body. So movement is just as important as all the other stuff. So that's kind of how I got into it.
That's a wonderful story. Lupus. Yeah, I love how you said it's a dumpster fire of an autoimmune disease. I ended up in this direction from some incurable diseases as well. It was in my son's case, and things that were so peaceful worked, in ways that I didn't expect. And it led me down this path as well. So tell me this idea of chronic pain. And we were talking again before the recording that this I've always looked for where do we have an assumption that's keeping us from making a breakthrough, right? And what are some of the assumptions that you've uncovered that are getting in the way of people being to address some of these issues? It sounds like you were looking at all these medical models for how do you biochemical or medical models, and it was so tell me more about that.
Okay,
What assumptions?
certainly. Yeah. But first, I do want to say that the medical model did help me. So I did have to take medicine, pharmaceutical medicine for the lupus. So I'm not trying to claim that this was all done through applied neurology. Um, so that has its merits, but it also has its limits. And when you're not working with the nervous system underlying the disease state and you're just suppressing the immune system, then it doesn't really move the needle towards like deep healing. So for me, I found the combination of the two to be really powerful. Um, but assumptions, I think the biggest assumption that has transformed the way I think, or how applied neurology has transformed the way I think, is around pain. And usually, when you have a pain like, oh, suddenly my shoulder is hurting today, you automatically think, oh, there's something wrong with my shoulder. And people will say to me all the time, oh, I pulled a blah, blah, blah. I pulled my back, which is such a vague term for something that's quite complex that is driven by the brain and the nervous system. Um, and so with my clients, a lot of the work is having to teach them about inputs and outputs of the nervous system. So your nervous system has its main job, which is to keep you alive. Your brain wants you to survive. And it's doing this by taking in information, which is inputs through your eyes, through your mouth, through your breathing, through your physical body, any sensory stimuli, that's input. It processes that input by comparing it to your beliefs or past experiences or what you know about the thing, the input, and then it produces an output, which there's a whole spectrum of outputs. And I like to put them on a spectrum of moving from survival protective outputs towards more like performance, and it doesn't even mean you have to be an athlete performing. It's just they go from protection, which is outputs in which your brain is trying to get you to change your behavior because it's telling you it doesn't feel safe. It does not think you are going to be safe in this particular moment. So it produces an output to make you change your behavior. And a lot of times that output is pain. So for instance, say you see a snake, your eyes take that information in, your brain processes it saying, okay, I know some things about snakes, or maybe I've never seen that, I'm scared of it. And you produce an output, which is maybe to run away, maybe your mouth gets really dry, your heart rate speeds up. So that's a very obvious, take the input in, process, produce an output. But there are other much more subtle processes happening that are not obvious, like a snake. So for instance, say you had a surgery in your abdomen years and years and years ago, like 20 years ago, and that area of your body, your brain has a sensory map of it and a motor map. So those are proprioceptive maps. And when you have a surgery or damage to tissues, the map can become blurry. And since your brain's trying to predict your survival all the time, every second of every day, it wants clarity of information. It wants quality information. So if the abdomen is kind of this, it has a bunch of blurry, vague information and damage possibly to tissues or whatnot, scar tissue, that is kind of creating an ongoing threat. And then say one day you go out and you're like, oh, I'm going to golf or I'm going to do some exercise, and you pull your back out, and it has nothing to do with something structurally wrong with the back. Sometimes it does. I'm not saying that this is true for all people, but a lot of times the brain is predicting, okay, you're doing something with this area of your body that's not clear to me. We don't have control over that area. You're moving it quickly or you're adding load to it. And I don't think this is safe. So I'm going to produce a pain and you're probably going to stop. And it's true. Most of us, when we get a pain, we stop doing the thing. We stop the golfing game or we stop walking if the knee's hurting. And it doesn't mean that there's a problem like a tissue damage in the back. And I find this so often with specifically back pain people, that when we can identify what is actually causing the threat, the brain's prediction that you're in danger, and work with that, the back pain just goes away right away and they get their mobility back. And so this whole thing of it's like a reworking of understanding outputs. So rather than saying, oh, my back hurts, something's wrong with the back, it's like, okay, my back's hurting. And what that is my brain telling me it does not think that we're going to be safe. It's a prediction of threat. So what could that be? Could it be because I was doing this movement I've never done before really quickly, and that novelty and speed and load is predicting, my brain's predicting dangerous? Could it be that I haven't eaten lunch and my brain's not getting good glucose, so it doesn't think I should start taking on more activities? Could it be that my eyes, I don't see well out of the left eye and that's a threat? Or could it be that my vestibular system has some deficits, so the brain's concerned I'm going to fall down, so then it makes my knees hurt and then I sit down and I can't fall down when I'm sitting? So like it's really wild when you get into it, just how effective the brain is at getting you to change your behavior. And pain is one of the biggest behavior changing tools that it uses. So, yeah.
Wow, pain is a predictor of threat. It's not a, a biomechanical response so
It can
much.
be, it can
So
be, but
much. Yeah.
really, like, yeah, it's your brain exactly predicting threat and basically getting you to try to change your behavior.
Wow. How do you untangle this? Because all of a sudden, this is unlocking a lot of ideas for me of how do you then diagnose or triage in what's the realm of this threat. For example, I'm doing some eye and PT vagus nerve, vagus tone exercises, along with some listening things that also help kind of undo some sort of PTSD sort of thing. And
Mhm.
I noticed my behavior changing in areas of my life I did not expect. And I was like, oh, where I would normally be triggered and angry, I wasn't. Where I would normally, block that, I didn't. And I if I weren't on kind of onto this realm of way of thinking, I wouldn't have associated those two things. And so how do you even begin to sort out with your clients where the threat is?
Well, certain things kind of have telltale signs. So it really depends. I also take a very thorough intake form where I'm asking about, like, oh, have you had any surgeries? How is your vision? How's your digestion? How's your sleep? Just tons of different things. And if someone has like a ton of visual stuff, like say for instance, they've had a surgery, so their right eye sees near and their left eye sees far, that's going to create threat. That's like everyone I've ever worked with that has lots of balance problems, which when your brain is not not receiving accurate information through the eyes, that's a big threat, whether it's binocular vision or just having poor vision in general or staring at a computer screen all day in one particular direction. So vision has a big impact. I also ask, I'm not a therapist. I don't want to know about people's trauma. Like, I'm not trying to dig that up, but I do ask about that in my intake form, because if there is a pattern that's been in place since early childhood, for instance, that is a pattern in the brain. So everything is a pattern. Even your pain is a pattern. So, yeah, I really look through the intake form and I talk with them and try to piece together, okay, well, what are some what are some big red flags? Let's look at those first. And those aren't always the big things that pay off. There's also, it's hard to know where to direct you, because there's a lot of things that go into it. If someone is what we call a bottom up nervous system, meaning, for instance, like if they're dysregulated, they usually want to move their body. Like if I get in an argument with my husband, I can't sit down and read. I'll be reading the same sentence over and over and over because my brain's all charged. So I have to go move my body. I'm like 100% bottom up. Other people that are top down, that's like going out and exercising is the last thing that they would want to use for nervous system regulation. They might want to read or play a video game or write, or I mean, scrolling's not quite the same. That's a little bit more like checking out, but yeah. So knowing which are you, that also helps me to know what inputs are going to work best for you. Are you someone where working with your vision is going to give you the highest payoff, or are you someone where we need to look at respiration and body-based stuff first? So it's really, really individual. Yeah.
What ended up helping you as you got in the direction of applied neurology?
My biggest things were the vagus nerve, which is one of the cranial nerves. And actually, most of the cranial nerves give me a lot of support working with them. Some of the cranial nerves are in an area of the brainstem called the PMRF, and that inhibits pain signals when you're working with it. So I found a lot of relief from cranial nerve stimuli. I also found a lot of relief with breathing stuff. I tend to be an over breather. And I think from years of doing yoga, I always thought I was such a great breather, but most people I come across they're over breathers. They're just breathing a lot quickly throughout the day. So their oxygen saturation is pretty high, which sounds like it would be a good thing, but your brain can get used to having a certain oxygen level, and then it's not able to deal with changes in CO2 quite as well. And you get, that's like a whole nother conversation actually. But yeah, what helped me the most was cranial nerves and respiration. And I was already kind of on this path of the functional range conditioning, but from years and years of yoga, in yoga, traditionally kind of you tend to do the same shape. There's like alignment there, which I don't really believe in anymore. But you're making the same shapes over and over and over every day. And that's great and all. Like I'm not saying don't do yoga, but the lack of variety, of speed, of load, of shape does not improve your proprioceptive maps, the map that your brain has of your entire body. So doing things with different ranges, like using the full capacity of your joints and all the different ranges with different load and different speed, that's really so important to your brain, because then your brain's like, oh, wow, you do have control over your hip joint and you can move it without getting your back involved. And those things really matter, having differentiated proprioceptive maps. And so doing the mobility work helped me to clear up a lot of blurry motor maps that were just they're like yoga maps only.
So they got more clear, and the different parts knew their capacity. They could collaborate better. You had different responses to different environments, so you were overall more able to sense your situation, so your brain feels more calm. I wonder, because I was definitely practicing more in the direction of all this variety, and then I found I was over moving. I was just move more, move weird, do all the things. And my nervous system, I didn't realize I was kind of armoring my existing foundational flaws. I was just amplifying them, even though I was adding all this variety and time and load. And then I backed way off to doing something much simpler. But I'm hearing what you're saying is I still need to keep those main ingredients in mind as long as they're from a safe nervous system point of view for being able to adapt. Anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, a phrase that comes to mind for me is the quality of the smaller movements is what informs the quality of the larger movements. So if you don't have good control over your ankle, and then you're going to go do a movement that combines ankle, knee, and hip, there's going to be a fallout on that. So your brain really wants to know that you have control over your joints. That's like a big deal. So yeah, I mean, and another thing is I'm a big believer in your practice modifying for the day, for what's happening in your life. So when I was really sick and had all this inflammation in my joints, there was no way I was going to do any weight training. That would be a nightmare. I'd be in so much pain. So during that time, I did so much somatic movement where I'm laying down on the floor, kind of like Feldenkrais style, and just moving the joints really gently, working with the synovial fluid, very, very gentle. Now that I'm not where I was, I do lots of weight training and I don't do stretching so much anymore. So you have to really work with your nervous system and your body where it is. And on the note of the nervous system, for the longest time, I was training my cranial nerves and my respiration mostly, because that is the start of the flow pattern in your brain. So you've got nerves that come up through your spinal cord, they go into the brain stem, then they move forward. So blood flow, neural activity, glucose, all of that oxygen, it comes from the back of the brain and goes forward to the front. And for so long for me, I was kind of in a low grade, I don't like to use the term fight or flight, but my survival brain was very active for many years. And so the front of my brain didn't really have a lot of capacity, let's just say that. And if I tried to do applied neurology techniques that were really frontal lobe heavy, or like math or dual tasking or eye drills, those I would often crash. Just wasn't resourced enough for that. So I had to spend a lot of time working on cranial nerves and respiration and getting to where my brain was fueled properly so that it could then go on to do harder tasks. So in the beginning of my nervous system healing, it looked much different than it does now, as far as what areas of the brain I'm trying to work on, the intensity of what I'm doing with those areas. So it changes. It's really important for your practice to change, period. Just like as your body evolves and changes.
And that implies one thing, that you do have a movement practice, and
For
that
sure.
you're letting it change too. Now, you're I've all week I've been running into the word cranial nerve, cranial nerve, cranial nerve. I looked at a couple of your awesome Instagram posts, and some of them were like, "Oh, this is directed at this specific nerve, and this one's directed here." My understanding too, also, is that chiropractics can sometimes have trouble even getting right up there to the base of the skull, right up there by the atlas. And how does this realm of applied neurology, how do you access those cranial nerves?
Well, there's 12 of them, and it depends on which one you're trying to touch on. But the vagus nerve is the biggest one that people know about, have heard about. It's really common to hear about. And that one, there's lots of ways to work with it, from doing like controlled breathing, like box breathing or straw breathing, humming, excuse me, humming, singing, gargling water, tapping on your belly, vibrating on your belly, getting belly massage. Like there's many, many ways to stimulate the vagus nerve. And that is, the vagus nerve isn't the only part of your parasympathetic, but it is the major branch of your parasympathetic, the like rest and digest part of your nervous system. So, and if that nerve is not working well, you have a lot more inflammation in the body. Your vagal tone, as they say, isn't as good. So, like, say, for instance, you have something that is really upsetting happen, or you feel yourself get triggered. When the vagus nerve is working well, you're able to bring yourself back down relatively quickly. And if it's not, then you might be spiraling out for quite a while. So, so vagus nerve is a big one. There's a trigeminal nerve, which is going to be sensory on your face. There's your abducens nerve, which is eye control, horizontal eye control movements. There's your hypoglossal and your glossopharyngeal, which have a lot to do with tongue and swallowing. So there's there
Yes.
are many of them, and doing specific exercises, like for instance, your facial nerve is one of them. It's a motor nerve, not a sensory nerve. So doing facial expressions helps to activate that nerve more. Um, yeah, there's tons of different ways to work with them and also to assess them. So a lot of times people will have one-sided issue where all of the nerve on the right side, whether it's vagus or facial or their eyes, it's not as good. It doesn't have as much neural activity. So being able to know which side might be a little underactive and how to activate it, or if it's the other way, it's hypersensitive, how to kind of mute some of those signals so it's not so activated. So yeah.
And are these more of a reset style set of practices that you get a certain amount of improvement and then they fade out over time? Like in your own evolution of using these techniques as you got away from lupus and the other pain that you had, how did your use of these practices for yourself change?
Well, in general, your brain will get used to things that you do regularly. So, um, to make it novel and interesting, you kind of have to make it harder sometimes. So, um, although that's not entirely true with some things for me, for instance, vibrating on my abdomen or doing any vagus nerve stimulation, it's always worked. It's never not worked. And sometimes I'll stack two different drills together so it's a little bit more stimuli. Um, so that just is always good. But for instance, stimulating the trigeminal nerve, that one's kind of hit or miss, where it used to be more powerful for me. Now my brain's used to that. It's like, okay, that's not that special anymore. So so oftentimes you do have to take it up a notch, and that might be doing more repetitions. It might be doing faster. It might be stacking drills. So you do one back to back with another, or you do two at the same time, three at the same time. It really depends on your brain. And when I was really sick, my brain was, I kind of think of it as like my brain was slightly on fire, very sensitive. I didn't need much input at all. I just needed a little minimal effective dose. Whereas my partner, he's a former professional athlete, super high functioning. And when I try to give him certain drills, his brain doesn't care. It's like, whatever, that's not special. That's not that hard for us. So for me to get the needle to move for him means I have to stack numerous drills. I have to do cognitive dual tasking. Like it can't be simple and easy because his brain is not the same as my brain. So, and he's also more of a top down. So, uh, yeah, every brain is unique.
And that leads right into how helpful it would be to have a professional like you coaching and designing the approach versus
For
just
sure.
trying something on Instagram for a minute and then you don't go back to it. Although I'm pretty good when I see something that works, I'll even just do it every day for a long time because I want to get the most value out of it. But I also like to know that they're measurable
Mhm.
assessments, there are measurable outcomes, and we're trusting not just trusting something might or might not be working. And like you were saying, I could be a bottom up or a top down, and what works for someone else might not at all work for me. So, wow. The other thing you hit upon too was surgery. That while it's a beautiful possibility when we really need it, there are surgical interventions, and yet we may not. I know until I hadn't really thought of the impact of surgery so much like when I was little, I had my adenoids out. I think everybody was having their tonsils and adenoids out. I never would have thought of the what would happen to the tissues or the effect on the region. And until there was a misdiagnosis and a wrongfully done surgery on my son when he was an infant, I hadn't realized that you need to sort of unwind that trauma. And we ended up using some things like brain spotting and some other techniques, but I even the level of the quality of the tissue changes when you have a surgical intervention. So I think that's another thing to account for when we're looking at something that's happening in our lives is that while surgery can save lives, it can also cause indirect side effects that we haven't even registered as a possible source of future. What have you noticed in the, so you've got a perspective, you've seen a lot more people than any of the rest of us on in kind of in this wheelhouse of this way of looking at the world. You shared some of the patterns that everyone's a little different. We have different nervous system styles. What are some of the other patterns that you've seen that none of the rest of us would have seen, either in kind of repeated successes or repeated, um, yeah. What have you seen?
Well, I tend to get a lot of women clients that are now kind of in their 50s and 60s who have had some trauma at some point early on, and they just kind of got on with their life. But they exhibit symptoms such as like hypervigilance, which is like being constantly aware of everything all the time, worrying a lot, anxiety. And what happens, so when you're midbrain, that's like what we would call the survival brain. When that's very active, it is a little bit of a hog with, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, it will hog up the resources because it's preparing for you to need to fight or flight. So if that becomes chronic, then people tend to have other things that come up that they're like, wow, I have all this brain fog and I'm having memory issues and and sometimes it's physical things, like I get dizzy when I'm under stress, or my vision's not as good when I'm under stress. And these are all telling me, oh, there's a pattern here of the midbrain being a little overactive and hogging some of the resources. And then the other systems in your brain and parts of your brain aren't as well resourced. And then you're having negative consequences of that because they're just not getting as much blood flow and oxygen and glucose. And so a lot of times with those, and I say women, I'm sure there are many men out there, but the women tend to come to me with these issues. Once we address blood flow and cranial nerves and respiration, it's like their brain comes back online. And this is also really common too with post-concussion syndrome people that I work with, to where like once you get better blood flow happening, like the little bit of exercise before their session, get their respiration dialed in, the brain's like, oh, finally, it's like drinking a glass of water when you've been parched for so long. And then you can actually start to train the areas that aren't functioning well. But if you don't address fueling before you try to do these things, it just won't work well. It's like trying to drive a diesel truck without gas, it's just not going to go. So, so yeah, I would say that's one of the patterns I see a lot of like women who there was a pattern that got set in place early on, maybe in childhood at some point, and they developed fawning tendencies, hypervigilance, and these patterns started to play out in the way that their brain functions and the patterns that it likes to go with. Your brain's always going to choose a familiar pattern. And so training in a new pattern is really powerful. And back to what you were saying before about you're doing this new healing modalities, and now you're seeing it play out in different areas of your life. That's what happens when you train your brain for a new pattern. Like it is a pattern making and recognizing machine. So if your pattern is to constantly be in a hypervigilant state, aware of everything, overanalyzing everything, kind of like ruminating, that is well worn. So then when you start to introduce a new pathway where you're like, hey, we're not going to do that anymore, we're going to do this. Instead, if you do it with enough repetition, then that becomes more easy for your brain to go down that path rather than the old tried and true pattern. And it shows up in so many different ways, from physical manifestations where you just have less pain, less anxiety, better sleep, better digestion. Those are all positive outputs of the nervous system, to things that you might not even think about, like being able to have a difficult conversation. Whereas before you'd probably just keep it to yourself and hide, but being able to use your voice, speak up when you need to, ask for what you want. Yeah, it's cool when it shows up like that.
So, what do sessions with you look like? Like, how often do you work with people? How long are your sessions? And are you in person or remote or both?
I do both. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is kind of a small town. So I would say my in-person level is probably like 10%, 15% at most of my teaching. Everyone else is online. I work with people all over the world, which is pretty cool about online work. You can just help people wherever. Um, Usually I will see someone. So the initial intake session with me is 90 minutes, and during that session, we're trying to identify what are the big threats or what are the big deficits that are creating a threat for your brain and what does your brain need more of. So my goal is for after that first session for the person to have about 8 to 15 techniques that they're going to work on. And this that they have to work on it. That's the one caveat is and it's not just every once in a while. You really have, if you want to train your brain for a new pattern, a new way of being, it takes repetition. So that's looking like 2, 3, 4 times a day doing a specific breathing drill or eye drill or vestibular drill. And all in all, it doesn't add up to that much time accumulatively, but it does matter that throughout the day, you're teaching your brain that it's safe. You're giving it some inputs in the morning, mid morning, afternoon, evening, just telling it, hey, we're safe, we're safe, we're safe with these sensory inputs. And you do that enough, and your baseline changes to where your brain is consistently safer, predicting less threat regularly. And that's when you start to feel the physical changes on the long haul, the reduction of pain, stuff like that. So I have people come the first time, they get a bunch of tools, assuming they're using the tools regularly and feeling a change. Then they come back usually about 2 weeks later. We change up the tools. Maybe we'll keep some and make them harder. Maybe we'll take out the ones that aren't working very well, add some new assessments, see how those go. Again, I send them on their way. They use the tools. All in all, people tend to see me between 2 and 5 times. And at that point, if what we're doing isn't working, then I am honest. I'm like, this, I'm not the right therapist for you. If we've thrown all this stuff at it and nothing's changing, we're not hitting the nail. Um, so if that happens, then I usually am like, you should go see someone else. But most of the time they get better and then they're like, okay, cool. And at that point, if like down the road, they're like, oh, I'm kind of dropping off. Some of my old symptoms are coming back, or I want to learn some new things. I got this new thing I had a car accident and I got to deal with that. Then we'll do what I call like spot treatment training where they just come every once in a while. But my goal is not to have people hooked to me. It's to give them tools to use to heal themselves. So yeah, I don't do a ton of hand holding. It's kind of like these are the tools, and if you're self-motivated to use them, then we're going to see progress. And if you're not, I'm probably not the right practitioner. So.
Wow, so much similarity to also when I help people with some resets, some movement resets. I'm like, well, if they don't take long, but you got to do them a couple times every day. And part of that is turning the one reason I post so much of myself sprinting is like a 9 second beautiful sprint is a reset in a way that they're like, you're running miles and hours and hours. Like, no, I'm just doing a reset a couple of times here and there and turning that model upside down where uh, maybe we used to think we had to do an hour of cardio every day and we have to do an hour of this every day and that you need so many weeks and months and years. I think that idea of the nervous system being able to uh, reset things, but like you're saying, we have these deeply worn grooves in our habits and our patterns, and if we don't interrupt those often enough, there's no way the new will take hold. But the beautiful thing that I think that you're also alluding to is once the body tastes the safe and the new, we can trust it to keep going.
Well, it's a positive reinforcement loop. So, like, if you are like, oh, I'm having this neck pain, we do a drill that takes 15 seconds, and right away you're like, wow, the neck pain's gone. You're motivated in that moment of like, wow, okay, I'm going to do that again. Whereas I think a lot of times if someone's like, you have to do this 5 times a day for a month before you see a change, I'm not going to stick with something like that. Like
Yeah.
I want instant feedback. I want to feel results. It doesn't have to be instant, but it has to be pretty quickly. That's why I never stick with supplements, because it's like, okay, 2 weeks in, if I can't feel a difference, I'm not taking this anymore.
Yeah, and I love the sovereignty that you're also advocating. Like I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to get you addicted to my treatment and my business. This is about empowerment and freedom. And yes, when we have a setback and starting to look at those setbacks, I remember a friend got in a little car accident and she didn't correlate this sudden change in her body to that. And I saw her eyes were crooked. And I was like, what happened? And we finally, so the way we do need spot treatments, maintenance and tune ups and adaptation, like you're saying, to get the best. Now, one question is this is mostly applied neurology that we've been talking about, right?
Mostly, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And there's also the functional range condition. Do you practice that consistently yourself?
Yeah, for sure. The way I think about it is your brain has two jobs. Number one is to keep you alive, and number two is movement. So the movement is applied neurology. So they're not separate. But if you're not moving well, that's a threat to your brain. So like they can't be separated. They go together. But yeah, I do practice functional range conditioning on myself. My joints are in a pretty good place. Like I don't have joint pain. Um, and I have, for the most part, the amount of mobility that I need for my life. If I were an athlete, I might need to do some tinkering to get like more range of certain things. But I really, again, I'm a believer of like training for your life. What do you need to be able to do? And if you can't raise your arm, that's a problem. Like you need to be able to raise your arm. But I don't need to be able to deadlift 500 pounds. So I don't need to train for that. I don't need to like build that capacity into my joints because it doesn't matter to me. It's not something I'm going to use. So as far as my mobility, it's pretty good. I just maintain it. So now it's like maintenance. I do my joint mobility, which is called CARs, controlled articular rotations. I do those every joint every day, and it takes less than 30 minutes. So it's pretty quick. And then I do my workouts and things like that. If I have a moment where I'm like, oh, something's going on with my hip, or oh, I've got this little neck pain, I combo applied neurology and functional mobility to just get and take care of it right away. So,
Oh, that's
yeah.
great. And have you worked with very many hypermobile people?
A few, yeah. That's not generally the people who come to me very often. What I have found is mobile people do not have good joint control. And so doing less stretching and more strength and when I say mobility, I mean active controlled mobility. Some people call stretching mobility and they're separate for me. Um, but yeah, so making sure that they can control their joint and they can actually feel that, because a lot of times with hypermobile people, there's kind of a issue with interoception, which is your felt sense of where your body is and what's happening inside. How do the joints feel inside? That can get a little bit skewed to where they're not feeling accurately what's happening. So yeah, working on joint mobility control, but also a lot of hypermobile people have issues with their vestibular system. So, and that's the inner ear balance. So I found doing vestibular drills is often a very high payoff for those folks as far as reducing pain. And yeah, comboing the two. So again, it's body and brain together.
Wow, what a powerful set of tools. I am so glad we had this conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience? Of course, I want them to find you. Your Instagram account is beyond_functional, correct?
Yep, that's
And
correct.
and anything else you want to say or direct people towards at this moment?
Well, I would say that Instagram is a great place to just get kind of a taste of what this is, because I just throw out tons of techniques and I share information about why the techniques are working or what's happening. But there's like a ton of little, like, here, try this thing, see what happens. Try this other thing, see what happens. And so that's a good entry point to see, like, okay, do I like this? Is it working for me? And then because of the individual nature of this type of work, I don't teach a lot of group classes. I mostly just work with people individually because it's so different for everybody. However, I am about to launch an online program that's a group class. It's more mobility than neuro. It's kind of like functional mobility with a side of neuro. And so that I'm still building out the details of it, but it's probably going to be a 2-month long weekly where we go through all the different joints of the body to make sure they're functioning like they're supposed to, and then also see how can we use applied neurology to improve the function, so to enhance the experience. So that's going to come up soon. And then this winter, I'm going to be focusing more on kind of the parasympathetic downregulation, like, because a lot of the people who follow me, like I said, are hypervigilant, high strung, stressed out, and, and don't know how to slow down. And in our culture, speed is rewarded, like how productive you are, stay busy, drink the caffeine, drink the monster drink, whatever, workout. It's like and people can really have that speed sort of embedded in their nervous system to where slowing down doesn't feel safe to their brain. They can't rest deeply, and they're not sleeping well, they're not digesting well, there's not that deep rest. And so as we head into the fall and the winter, that's where I'll be turning my sights, is to just offer people some resources and like workshops around deep rest and slowing down and like quieting all the noise. So, because for me, I like to be in sync with the seasons. So winter is time to, drop the leaves like the trees and resource your energy within, slow down, contemplate all the things that just happened for the past year. So yeah, that'll be kind of towards winter. So those are two things coming up. And aside from that, you can catch me on Instagram or reach out through email.
And I just have to thank you. You're so generous with all the things that you're sharing, and taking the time to post it and to make these classes is a real gift to all of us. And I love the seasonality that you're talking about, where instead of flattening and copying, and you're there's this richness to life when it's not in a monotone, one size fits all experience.
Well,
Beautiful.
thank you. Thank you so much for having me too.
What a pleasure. All right, Anna, Beyond Functional, thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.